Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've brought some really interesting material, and today we're going to get into something called cluster analysis.
Yeah, it's a fascinating technique.
It sounds like a way to find hidden patterns, grouping similar stuff together.
Exactly. And the goal for this deep dive is really just to break down the main ideas. What it is, why it's handy for looking at data, even if you're not super technical.
Okay, good. So, let's start at the beginning. What's the fundamental aim? What are we trying to do with cluster analysis?
Right. The core idea is simple. Find distinct groups in your data. You look at all your data points, and you group the ones that are similar to each other.
Like sorting laundry, whites, colors.
Kind of, yeah. Taking a mixed pile and putting it into logical bins based on shared features. That's the heart of it.
Makes sense. So how do we actually make these bins or clusters? Are there different methods?
Oh, definitely. Two really common ones you'll hear about are hierarchical clustering and k-means clustering.
Hierarchical and Caminzo.
So hierarchical is sort of step by step. Imagine every single data point starts out as its own little cluster.
Okay, tiny clusters everywhere.
Exactly. Then the algorithm finds the two closest clusters and merges them. Then it finds the next closest, merges them, and so on. It keeps going until everything is linked together in one big structure.
Ah, so it builds up, like a family tree.
Precisely. And the visual output is actually called a dendrogram, which looks very much like a tree diagram showing how everything connects.
Cool, a data family tree. I like that. So what about the other one? K-means.
K-means works a bit differently. It's more iterative. You first have to decide or guess how many clusters you think are in the data. Let's call that number K.
So you start with a target number of groups.
Right. Then the algorithm randomly places K starting points, called centroids. It assigns each data point to its nearest centroid, creating K initial clusters.
Okay.
Then it recalculates the position of each centroid based on the average of all the points assigned to it. And then it reassigns the points again based on the new centroid locations.
Ah, so it adjusts.
Exactly. It keeps doing that. Assign points, update centroids, assign points, update centroids until the points stop switching clusters and the centroids stabilize.
Got it. So hierarchical shows you the whole merging history, while K-means finds a specific number of groups by sort of homing in on their centers.
You got it.
Now, a key thing seems to be this idea of similar or close. How do we actually define that for the algorithm?
That's absolutely crucial. It comes down to the distance metric. Think of it as the ruler you use to measure the gap between data points.
A ruler for data.
Yeah. Are you using Euclidean distance, like a straight line? Or maybe Manhattan distance, like city blocks? The metric you choose depends on your data and what similarity means for your specific problem. It really shapes the outcome.
Okay, different rulers for different jobs. So let's say we run one of these methods, we get our clusters. How do we know if they're any good? If they actually mean something?
Great question. We need ways to evaluate the quality. One popular measure is the silhouette coefficient.
Silhouette coefficient. Okay.
It basically looks at each data point and measures two things.
Hmm.
How close it is to other points in its own cluster, and how close it is to points in the nearest neighboring cluster.
Uh-huh.
It combines these to give a score for each point, usually from -1 to +1. A score near +1 means the point is well clustered, fitting nicely in its group and far from others.
And lower scores.
A score near 0 means it's kind of on the fence, maybe close to a boundary between clusters. A negative score suggests it might actually be in the wrong cluster altogether.
So it's like a confidence score for each point's assignment. That's useful. And for K-means, you mentioned needing to pick K first. How do you figure out the right number of clusters?
That's often one of the trickiest parts. There's no single perfect answer, but you can try running k-means with different values of, say, 2 clusters, 3 clusters, 4 clusters, and then calculate the average silhouette score for each result.
And pick the K that gives the best score.
Often, yeah. You look for a K that gives a relatively high average silhouette score. It helps guide the choice.
Are there like hidden assumptions or things we need to watch out for?
Yes, definitely. K-means, for example, tends to assume that clusters are sort of round, like spherical, and roughly the same size and density. If your data has clusters that are weirdly shaped or very different sizes, K-means might struggle a bit.
So it's not always the right tool if the groups are, say, long and thin, or one is tiny and one is huge.
Exactly. You need to be aware of the method's biases or assumptions. Hierarchical clustering is often more flexible with shapes, but it has its own complexities.
Okay. And how do we talk about how tightly packed a cluster is versus how separate it is from others?
Good point. We talk about within cluster variation. That's how spread out the points are inside a single cluster. You generally want this to be low, meaning the clusters are tight.
Tight groups, got it.
And then there's between cluster variation, which is how far apart the different clusters are from each other. You want this to be high, clear separation between the groups.
So low within, high between, that's the ideal.
That's the goal for a good clustering result, generally speaking.
And back to those dendrograms from hierarchical clustering, how do they help with picking the number of clusters? You mentioned the tree structure.
Right. On the dendrogram, the vertical lines represent the distance at which clusters were merged. You often look for a place on the diagram where the merges involve suddenly much longer vertical lines.
A big jump in distance.
Exactly. A long vertical line suggests you're merging two clusters that are actually quite far apart, quite dissimilar. Cutting the tree horizontally just before those really long jumps can give you a natural number of clusters.
Okay, so the tree itself gives clues about where the natural breaks are. What about when you have tons of data, like lots and lots of variables for each point? Does that cause problems?
It definitely can. This is sometimes called the curse of dimensionality. When you have many, many dimensions or variables, the concept of distance can get weird. Points can end up seeming far apart even when they might be conceptually similar.
So distance becomes less meaningful.
In some ways, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if your variables are on very different scales, like one is measured in millions and another from 1 to 10, the variable with the bigger numbers can totally dominate the distance calculation.
Ah, so it overshadows the others.
Precisely. That's why standardization is often a really important pre-processing step. You rescale your variables, maybe to have a mean of 0, a
Right.
standard deviation of 1, so they all contribute more equally to the clustering.
Right, put everything on a level playing field before you start grouping. Makes sense.
Yeah, it avoids letting scale alone dictate the results.
Okay, so wrapping this up then, cluster analysis is, well, it seems like a really versatile toolkit for finding structure that you might not see otherwise.
It absolutely is. From market segmentation to image analysis to bioinformatics, it pops up everywhere.
But it's not automatic. You have to, choose the right method, think about things like distance and K, check the assumptions.
And evaluate the results carefully, using metrics like the silhouette score. It requires thoughtful application.
So the key takeaway is it's powerful for discovery, but you need to understand how it works to use it well.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, final thought for you listening. How could you apply this idea of grouping similar items, maybe not with complex algorithms, but just the principle? Think about organizing files, understanding customer types from the material shared, or even just seeing patterns in your everyday observations. There's structure out there if you look for it. Thanks for diving in with us.